Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, it's a real pleasure to have Billy Samoa Saleebey with me. Billy, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin by asking you to tell everybody a little bit about who you are. I know lots of people in the podcasting space know who you are, but for those who maybe don't, or from other parts of the world, tell us a little bit about your journey, because it's an interesting one.
Well, appreciate it, Simon. I'm super excited for this opportunity, and I already know this is going to be a great conversation. So, I am based in Los Angeles. I grew up here, so it's been an interesting start to 2025, to say the least. Most of my career was spent in the entertainment business and education business. And when I say education, when I left entertainment and I made a movie and worked on big budget Hollywood movies, it was an amazing journey, but I needed to really start to think about what my career would be if I wanted to make income that I could support a family on. Because making independent movies, it's not always a financial winner. So after I made my movie and realized that 7 years working on a movie did not provide 7 years worth of income, I started looking elsewhere. So I found at the time a industry that was just about to explode. They say right time, right place. It was California and the solar industry, solar panels. So renewable energy was just about to have a huge explosion. And I was in the right place, right time. Found a company, ended up helping that company become one of the major players in the podcast, in the solar space. And as a result, I got some really cool opportunities. So I got recruited to go work at a company called Solar City. And Solar City at the time was the biggest solar player, happened to also be owned by Elon Musk's cousins. So at Solar City, I created a TV show called Solar City TV, and it kind of put me on the map. And because of that, when Tesla acquired Solar City, I got a chance to do something really cool, which is to build their onboarding program. So I built the onboarding new hire program for Tesla. And then that gave me the opportunity to have a new role, which was a global head of product and sales training. When I left, I said, what do I do next? I have this entertainment background, this education corporate background and communication background, and a podcast was a good fit. So I started my own show, Inside Out, and I realized I needed help. So I built a team, video editor, audio editor, etc. And I'm like, wait a second, there's a business here. So I built a bigger team, and that's how my business Podify was founded. Really with the idea of helping thought leaders, speakers, authors, founders, people that have something interesting to say, produce their show and build their platform through podcasts, YouTube, and all the different ways in which people can share information in this incredible landscape that exists today.
Okay, let me just breathe a minute. So we've gone LA, Solar City, we've gone LA, movies, Solar City, Tesla, and now, the top 1% Inside Out, I think is top 1% globally in terms of podcasts. And of course, the company. Can I just take you back to starting the podcast, because that was a huge move, right? You started off talking about independent movies, and that takes a lot of, in my limited experience, blood, sweat, and tears. It's a bit like being a VC. You might back 25 of these things, and one might make it. They're tough to do. But you started there. You moved into very much into corporate, I suppose, if I can use that term,
Sure.
and then to a really important role, where basically anybody who's joining Tesla goes through your program. But then you obviously pivoted completely to do the podcast. So what was it about podcasting at the time? Were you heavily into them? Was it a bit of the film background stirred into it? And what made you do the podcast that you started with?
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't listen to podcasts a lot, but of course, enough to be familiar with the platform. But it was more of I've always been attracted to creating experiences, to building something. And a podcast felt like that. So in training, I would build the training programs. When I was building onboarding, I'd create that. When I was creating Solar City TV, it was building a TV show for an internal audience. When I made my movie, it was making a movie. And so I'm a builder, I think, at my core. And I like to give people an experience. I used to throw big parties, big New Year's Eve parties on like rooftops and these fancy locations. And it's because I think I like to see how impacts people, how it affects people. And I'm a people pleaser at my core. And so when I started my podcast, it was more of a opportunity to build something from the ground up. I didn't know what I didn't know. I learned a lot along the way. That first podcast I still create today. It's had lots of evolutions, but when you start anything new, you got to be hungry for knowledge. You and I talked about this before we started. Like, there's people who learn quickly, and there's others who maybe don't learn as quickly. I think I'm probably in the middle. I don't always learn the fastest, but I am dedicated to keeping myself humble enough to know that I don't know it all. I'm constantly learning and taking on new information. And I've learned so much along the way. I started a second podcast called For the Love of Podcast, specifically so I could interview podcasters who've been successful, that are in the Podcast Hall of Fame, that have done a lot in their podcast career that I could learn from. And that became a really good initial information source, education source for me as I developed and became better at what I do.
Yeah, it's very smart. I love those two things. Obviously, here on the Global Discussion, we catch up with people like you, and we focus very much on creatives, leaders, and thinkers. And I know the Inside Out show, you talk about the elite business leaders. You talk about people who are maybe founders, the entrepreneur. So at this point, you've built up this rich history of information, this almost learning data bank, if I can put it that way, of all these great insights. Has that been beneficial? How many episodes are you in at this stage? And are there any that sort of spring to mind that you think back and think, wow, that was an incredible discussion. We got a lot out of that.
Yeah, it's a great way of putting it. And there has been this collection of knowledge, this database of insights. And I can't say there's any singular one that stands out more than others. I have a few that I'll share, maybe a couple quick hits that have affected me personally in a very profound way. So I am a perfectionist. Like, I grew up, when I would make my school projects, they would always be like over the top. I think my mom sort of instilled this desire to not settle for kind of just making it good. We wanted to make it exceptional. So that has proven to be a part of who I am. And it's I don't look at perfectionism as a bad thing. It's real. It's how you manage your perfectionism that matters. And so this insight that I got was very helpful, which is to think in versions. And by that, I mean, version 1 is just your version 1. It doesn't need to be as good as a version 10 would be. And so version 1 will help you get to a version 2, 3, and 4. We are often so set on a version 10 thinking, when really we should be like, how do we get to that first version as quickly as possible? Well, not compromising, our something that's good. You still want it to be good, but good enough to get feedback, good enough to make improvements on. Without that, your version 10 won't be as good as it could be because you haven't gotten all that good feedback. So that's one big one, is thinking versions. And then the other one that people always ask, what did you learn from Tesla? To me, the thing that I come back to when I think about what we've talked about on the podcast, one of the biggest topics that we talk about a lot is this idea of first principles thinking. This is something that I got from Elon, and it's this idea where we shouldn't just be reasoning by analogy. We shouldn't be thinking, okay, here's a car that exists. Let's make a car that's just a little bit better than that car. Instead, what if we started from scratch and we didn't have any pre-existing thing to pull from that would give us the guidance? Instead, we're going to think about, if we know we have the laws of nature, we have a lot of physics, those are our parameters. Aside from that, anything's on the table. If we were building it from the ground up, how would we build it in the best way possible? And I think this could apply to anything that you're working on. It could be a school project. It could be a work project. It could be something in your home. And like, how do you start from ground zero and really not just use what already exists as your guiding light? Think about it in a much broader sense than you might otherwise.
Love that. And I suppose that, to some degree, that learning from that show, because I know maybe around a year later when you started the for the love of podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
and you were saying earlier, you're interviewing people that have made a real success at podcasting, people sort of Hall of Famers, I think was the term that you used. But for some people, podcasting is a slow burn, a lot of effort journey. We hear a lot about pod fade and people dropping
Mm.
off after a number of episodes. And others seem to be rocket ship successes. And then you end up at, I don't know, Joe Rogan or whoever. Um, love him or hate him, I suppose. But when you look at maybe some of the insights of what's making certain podcasts more successful than others, or what's lighting that touch paper for some podcasts, has there been any sort of,
Mm.
smart insights that have come out of that show in particular?
Yeah, a ton, and I wouldn't even limit it to the show itself. I've learned a lot since making the show. I'd say there's a few things that come to mind. So, one is the concept shareable? So I'll give you an example. We have a show that we produce called "What Would Ted Lasso Do?" It's a leadership podcast looking at leadership through the lens of Ted Lasso, who's a pop culture figure, and so it's very easy to describe that show. It's a leadership show about, it looks at like I just described it, right? So it's easy to describe. I'll add into that. It also uses what I call the s'mores effect, which is for those who've gone camping before, you've ever had a s'mores, it's graham cracker, chocolate, and marshmallow combined over a fire. And that combination is magical. Any individual one of those items is good, but you put them together and it's magic. So for the same reason a Hollywood producer says it's this movie meets this movie, it makes it easy to explain what it is they're thinking about or envisioning. So I think concept matters a great deal. So one is your concept shareable? Two, is there a pre-existing audience for the type of content you're putting out? Why did true crime shows do really well? Guess what? Huge true crime audience. Why did my friend who started a show about the San Francisco 49ers football team do really well? Guess what? There's a huge amount of people who are curious about the San Francisco 49ers. So understanding your market, addressable market, and being able to serve that market. And then the third thing is, what's your unique value proposition? How do you differentiate from everyone else out there that maybe is in that market or maybe has put together a show that has a great concept? And the way I think about this is, are you doing something that other shows aren't doing in the same way? It could be that you're focused on a very specific part of the journey of whatever it is you're discussing, or maybe it's a very niche area of a topic that you're focused on, or maybe it's that you've figured out a format or a structure that makes your show more unique, that more memorable. And so if you have a concept that's shareable, if you're able to be in a pre-existing addressable market that's large enough, but also not overly competitive or overly vague. And then if you're able to find that it factor, find something about your show that'll make it stand out, that'll give it a unique value proposition to all the other shows.
Thanks, Billy. That's some great feedback and some great insights from the show, and I'm sure other places, and great advice. But you were also mentioning, if I can just bring that back up, that when you change career again, this is post Tesla, you needed to figure out, and post the movie business. Well, how can I make a living? How can I make good money here? How can I support a family here? And I know a lot of podcasters think they're going to get sponsorship deals straight out the door. The money's going to come rolling in. And often that doesn't happen. And that, of course, that's only one way you can get it, whether it's people supporting you on Patreon, whether it's people sponsoring the show with advertising, whether it's, the host reading out the ads. But you've also, I suppose, added another string to the bow, because you mentioned Podify, right? Which is sort of another business. Could you tell us, like, if are you looking for people who are, I've got this great idea for a podcast, but I don't know what to do? Are you looking for people who've got a podcast but don't have time? They just want to record. You do everything else. What was the thinking behind Podify, Billy?
Great question. Yeah. So there a few things. So I do want to talk about the monetization because that matters too. So, but I'll start with your question. With Podify, really what we do is we buy people back their time. For people who want to build a platform, and they're just getting started and they don't know what to do, we help them with the launch and then help them produce the show on an ongoing basis. For people that already have a show, but they are overwhelmed with the amount of work, we offload that work to our team, who then does the editing, does the publishing, does all the things that they don't either have the time to do or don't have the desire to do because they want to do other things. And so we act as that engine, if you will, that production engine that they could hire an outsourced person by person, but what we are is a full service team. So we have a video production team, an audio production team, a social media team, a copywriting team. We have teams that specialize in web development, and all these teams collectively work on the shows that we partner with, and we treat every show as like a partner. That's the way we think about it. And we provide a service for a fee. We're a production partner. We provide that service. They then pay us a subscription, and the subscription varies based upon how much work we're doing. To circle back just real quick on the monetization front, because it's a really good point. Monetization for podcasts, I boil down to 5 vehicles. It's advertising, sponsorship, sell other people's products, sell your own product, or build an ecosystem that you could bring people to, like a community. Most people think of advertising, but the reality is, and this is what I hate to burst people's bubble, most podcasts are not a business. That's just the reality. And what I mean by that is they're not monetizing the media in a meaningful way, especially when it comes to advertising. Now, here's the thinking behind this. For every 1,000 downloads, you make $15 to $50 on it, which is a CPM model, cost per mil, for every 1,000 downloads. So you need tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of downloads to make money on advertising. Now, it's a quick distinction. Sponsorship's the cousin to advertising, but you can actually make money with sponsorships if you have a very targeted demographic. If you're speaking to a very specific group. There's a guy, Harry Duran, who has a show called the Vertical Farming Podcast. Very small subsection of agriculture, but it's actually a $10 billion industry. He now could go to people who want to speak to that audience and say, I have a media company, and part of that media company is his podcast. Part of that media company is his newsletter, his speaking engagements, social, all those things. Would you like to sponsor this? You could have a tier 1 sponsorship package, tier 2, tier 3, and each one offers more than the previous, and then you charge more for it. The other 3, which is sell your other people's products, sell your own products, and build community, those are self-explanatory. But I would say selling your own product is by far the easiest and the most profitable, because you get to set the price. You get to control how you point people to them. You can control the whole mechanism for bringing them into your ecosystem of products that you offer. You get to create the funnel and all those things that help you with conversion. And the last thing I'll share is that there's also a networking component and a brand building component to podcasting that may not be totally tied to like one for one, I'm making this money. But if you want to build connections and opportunities, that is a huge, huge opportunity for anyone starting a podcast that you may not even have considered. There are people who have podcasts where it's a Trojan horse for them to bring people into their client pool, prospect pool, and they interview them and they become their clients.
And I think some good examples of that are, there are some, say, well-known, let's call them consumer type podcasts, celebrity type podcasts. But there's an awful lot of more niche podcasts where it's B2B type focus to doing exactly what you're saying. It's sort of, it's not done to make money in itself. It's done to be able to corral a community together who then become interested in what that company or host is talking about. Vertical farming would be one example of that.
Yeah.
Do you find that in a lot of cases that when you start off on this discussion, or somebody comes to you through your Podify business, that do you have to start back, regardless of where they are in the cycle? Do you often find yourself going back saying, what are you doing the podcast for? So what are you trying to achieve? And do you have to go back to that step all the time, Billy?
It's a very valuable thing to do. And I say ground in intention. Why am I doing this? And then what does success look like? If this podcast is successful, then X. and defining what that X is. And so some people know and others don't, because if we know what the X is and what we're targeting outcome wise, results wise, then we could reverse engineer our way to get there. But if we're kind of just doing it and it's abstract or not clear, not written down, it lacks specificity, it's vague, it's squishy. If it's a squishy result, then it's going to be hard to get there. And so, yes, to answer your question, 100%, that's something that I strongly suggest. Now, again, some people already know and they got it dialed in, and then others, we're starting from scratch. So we might need to change the branding. We might need to change who they're interviewing. We might need to change the way it's packaged. Packaging matters a whole lot with podcasts, and people forget this. They spend 80% of their time on the content and 20% of the time on the marketing. And like, if you inverse that, and marketing includes the visual representation, includes where it's being pushed out, but also it includes, in this kind of, it blends the two, it's content, but it's how does it start? How does your show start? Because that's what's going to hook people. I call it the trifecta. If you're thinking about YouTube as an example, one is you evoke curiosity with a thumbnail. And by the way, the line between podcast and YouTube is blurred. So I believe that, like anybody doing a podcast, you're not doing YouTube, you're missing opportunity, right? So one is look at the evoking curiosity thumbnail leading to a title that validates that curiosity and deepens it, leading to them clicking and then watching the first 30 seconds to a minute, and then they get hooked. You don't go fishing without a hook at the end of the line. Same thing with the podcast intro. If the intro is boring or not clear, people go somewhere else. But if you grab their attention, validate their attention, and then retain their attention with a really strong hook, you're going to give yourself a much greater opportunity for success. Now, there's also other factors like, is the content what people want, and all, does the channel make it clear, all those things, but that gives you a good chance.
It's interesting you talk about YouTube as well, because, probably over the last number of years, lots of people, you sort of diehard audio podcasts, and then you've people, celebrating how great YouTube is podcast. We saw the Google podcast come and go, and who knows what happens there, and now YouTube podcast. But as a discovery engine, as a search engine, it seems to be working for podcasters.
Well, you can't minimize that the distribution ability that YouTube has is frankly superior to what you have with podcasts, because podcasts, they're syndicated to all the different players, but the algorithm that you get with YouTube, it really understands you. It knows what you want. It helps you find content that's similar to other content that you like. You also have a lot of availability of SEO / optimization tactics that you could employ that will help your videos find its audience. So to your point, Google's the second largest search engine. Everyone knows that. You heard that fact a million times. So why would you not capitalize on that? Because people are searching for things. Guess what? Your podcast pops up, then it helps. There's so many reasons to do it. And I can think of very few reasons to not do it. And so my suggestion is, the only reason that somebody does an audio only, and by the way, I do think there are benefits to audio only, but they're outweighed by the benefits of a YouTube. The benefits of an audio only, there's something special just hearing yourself on a mic and understanding how your voice is coming through, and you don't need to focus on what I look like or all those other things. And same thing with your guests. So there is, I've done an audio only as a guest, and it was actually refreshing, because I cared less. I had my headphones on. I was really thinking about everything. It was a good experience. But also they're missing out on a huge opportunity with the video audience.
I suppose it's why we still have traditional terrestrial and online radio stations, right? It's an audio only.
True. Yeah, they still exist. Look at Spotify. Spotify's doing video now. They've been doing video for a while, but now you could add thumbnails, you could add shorts. They're monetizing, they're jumping in to the video space. Because if you look at even the search term video podcasting has surged astronomically over the last 2 years. absolutely insane. So we've optimized some of our marketing stuff specifically for video podcasts because we know it's just like it is a huge. I mean, the vlog, the YouTube vlog has been replaced with the podcast. If you're looking at what the creators are doing, like a lot of YouTube creators are creating podcasts. I mean, most of them now have some podcast component to their channel, and now a lot of podcasters are stepping in as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I see that. There's again that blurring of the lines between video bloggers historically and
yeah,
regular episodes that are becoming more podcasty, serialized type of thing. So, Billy, last question on this, because I do want to ask you a couple of other quick things before we run out
sure.
of time. Obviously, people and individuals, the word brand comes up, whether you're building a personal brand or a business brand. And I'm just wondering, when it comes to podcasting, and this is just out of pure curiosity, do you find that the people that sort of navigate more towards your services are people who've tried it, realized that although it's in inverted commas to some degree free, but the amount of time, expertise, energy that's required is just overwhelming? Or are they more in the camp of, I know I need to do this, but we've no idea where to start? Or is it just a complete
Yeah.
mix?
Yeah, it is a mix to some degree. I think when we started, it was more people just wanting the support or needing the support, not exactly knowing. What's sort of evolved as we've evolved is where one, we have different marketing channels. So we have a lot of people are inbound through referral. And then because I'm very active on LinkedIn, we get a lot of inbound through the content I put out on LinkedIn. We do have outreach on LinkedIn and those sorts of things. And then we've done some Google ads. So with the Google ads, that's where we find new shows. That's where we find people that want to launch a podcast. With referrals, a lot of times it's people that either have a, an idea for a show and they want to launch, or they already produced a show and they either aren't happy with their current provider or they're tired of doing it themselves. And then with LinkedIn, it's kind of a mixed bag, but a lot of people, they are either looking to outsource because they've gotten to a point where the show is it's unmanageable to do it themselves. Or in some cases, it's they want to enhance what they're doing. They don't like what the current provider is doing. It's a lot of people, and I don't want to disparage other companies, but it's what I call check the box. They're going to do exactly what the bare minimum is and not a little bit even over that. And so for us, I'm not saying we're perfect, but what we're trying to do is strategically create the content in a way that will get the results. So that's why I go back to like, how do we think about the strategy on YouTube? How do we think about the strategy on Instagram? How do we think about the strategy for Spotify? And looking at how that platform works. And so being a bit more thoughtful when it comes to creating content that will work well on the various platforms that exist, because there's so much opportunity out there. But if you're not strategic, you're probably leaving a little bit of meat on the bone.
Yeah, and it's lovely because it brings us full circle back to why you have a full service type agency business, because you need that 360 around the show to actually
Mm,
make it work. So that makes perfect sense. Before I run out of time, Billy, I'm going to hit you with some quick questions here. You've got a lot going on, I'm sure, and you've got a great team around you. But when you think forward over the next 6, 12, 18 months, what are you thinking about? How do you go about planning in your world? What's on your horizon roadmap? What are you thinking
yeah.
about?
Yeah, so there's three big things. So big thing number one is we're gonna do in-person recording studios in Los Angeles, New York, and Austin to start in the US. We're gonna start with LA. So that's one. Uh, Video podcasting, as hot as it really helps to have in-person facilities to do the recordings. And being in LA, it's kind of silly not to. Number two is my own video content production. So I am being a business owner, it takes a lot from me. I'll be honest. Like I haven't spent as much time doing all the things, but in the last 30 days, I've been recording a lot of videos that are being edited right now. So I would say my own personal content, making that a big thing. And then the last thing is technology. So we're building out a tech platform right now that'll help podcasters grow on YouTube. It's a very specific goal, which is most podcasters have a desire to be successful on YouTube, but it's kind of a black box. They don't know what to do. So providing a full audit of their channel, but beyond that, providing a roadmap to get their channel to the next level. So those would be the three big things that are on my mind for 2025.
Sounds exciting. And last two questions. Is there anything else you want to share with our worldwide audience today while we have them? Maybe something we've talked about, you want to double down on, something completely new. What's your parting thought for us? And secondly, and really importantly, if people want to get in touch with you, find out more about your podcast, find out more about your business, where do you want to point people to, Billy?
Yeah. Well, thank you. And that's an easy one. You go to LinkedIn, type in Billy Samoa, you'll find me. Send me a note. Let me know you heard the show. And also, you go to Podify, PODIFY.com. You could book time with me if you're interested there. There's links to book a time. We'll do a strategy call. Those are free. The first strategy call, I really do treat as a strategy call. Yes, of course, I want to earn your business, but I also want to help you, even if we don't end up working together. And so I'll leave a final thought and answer your first question there, which is, I think no matter what type of content you want to create, it's really important to think about audience first. And who is that audience? And by designing a listener avatar that is clear, you're able to serve that audience in the best way possible. So you think about your listener avatar, your viewer avatar. What are their buying habits? What are their psychographics, their demographics? Where do they live? Where do they work? Write a story about that person in a way that you will remember all the intricacies. What do they watch on Netflix? What do they listen to? Think about who they are and really, what are their pain points? What are their challenges? What are the things that you're going to help them with? Because one thing I know for sure is all roads lead back to defining who you're talking to. The clearer picture you have there, the easier it is for you to serve them in the best way possible. And so that's an exercise that if you haven't really, done a deep dive, it's worth your time. It's worth your investment to figure that out, because then you're able to really provide the most value for your core audience in the best way possible.
That's a fantastic thing to leave our audience with. So thank you, Billy. It brings me nicely to the end of this show. I'm going to thank our audience for watching or listening wherever they are in the world. Of course, I'm going to ask them to follow, like, subscribe, everything you're doing, and of course, the global discussion. And hopefully, they'll join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Billy. But thanks for being on the show, Billy. It's been a real pleasure today.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Simon. Thank you for the opportunity, and I really enjoyed it every minute. Thank you so much.